Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first talk of the Guernsey Literary Festival. I have to say it's an absolute pleasure to support this event. Today, did you think about how much money you're going to make? Did you think, how much power can I attain? Did you think, how much fame can I reach? Most people think about these things every day. Our speaker, Jacqueline Novogratz, is the antithesis of all of this. She is quoted by Forbes as being one of the 100 greatest living minds today for her philosophy for putting humanity ahead of profit. I've been fascinated by Jacqueline's talks. I've listened to her podcasts. And not only is she very impressive academically, having had an MBA at Stanford, and she's only got 7 honorary doctorates. I love her quotes. She looks at people in poverty as being customers. They just need goods and services at the right price. She's got some incredible quotes, such as, idealism is needed now more than ever. And my favorite, if people don't tell you you're crazy, you're not doing enough to change the world. Certainly sentiments that we share in Dory Financial Modelling. And I really feel that Jacqueline Novogratz's greatest accolade is the fact that she's delivered electricity to 100 million of the world's poor. If that doesn't deserve top billing at any event, I don't know what does. And so with no further ado, I'd like to say thank you, pass you over to Terry, and introduce Jacqueline Novogratz. Thank you. So Tony, thank you.
Close, yeah, close. Good evening, everybody. Are we going to get Jacqueline up on screen? Hi, Jacqueline. Welcome to Guernsey.
Hi.
How are you?
It's wonderful to be in Guernsey.
Yeah. I understand you're speaking to us from just outside New York City. Is that right?
I am indeed. Nice to see your face, Tony.
Great to see you. Right, this evening we're going to talk about your latest book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. And really just to encapsulate that, that's really comes out of your experience over the last 20 years, having set up Acumen. And it talks not only about Acumen and the work Acumen does, but also about your personal journey, really. It's very much a personal experience. And I think that makes it even more inspiring, having read it. And in a sense, I guess I would perhaps sum it up very succinctly as you're looking for a new social contract for the world, in a way. So we're going to talk about your book, about your experience, for about 40, 45 minutes. And then we'll open it out to the audience here this evening. So just to kick off, in 2001, you set up Acumen, and it was a sort of new type of organization. The aim was to bring a new and unique approach to dealing with some of the most difficult issues in the world involving poverty. Can you tell us how you came to start Acumen and what that new unique approach was?
Sure. I had started my career on Wall Street, and there, primarily in Latin America, I had seen how markets play such a powerful role, supporting entrepreneurs, building jobs, enabling innovation, and yet on the other hand, they so often overlooked the poor and sometimes exploited the poor. And then I moved to Rwanda, and I helped start the nation's first microfinance bank with a small group of women. This is back in 1986. And at that point in the world's history, I saw that top-down aid and government too often creates dependencies. And that really, what I was after was dignity, that I'd learned through all of that work that the opposite of poverty isn't income, it isn't wealth, it's dignity. And that really led to the beginning of Acumen. That if we started with the problem that we were trying to solve rather than the instrument we had at hand, what if we could take philanthropy and invest it as long-term patient capital? I'm talking 10 to 15-year capital in intrepid entrepreneurs that were going to places where government and markets had both failed the poor: healthcare, education, energy, agriculture. What if we supported those entrepreneurs with the kind of true accompaniment that they needed to try, fail, try again? Could they actually create solutions that enabled the poor greater agency, the poor choice, opportunity, which is dignity? And here we are now, about 300 million people served through the companies in which we've invested, and it's been a remarkable experience to see.
Can you tell us something about the structure of Acumen? You've got various concepts. You mentioned patient capital. You have the idea of partners. You also have fellows. Can you just describe, what those concepts mean, who those people are?
Sure. Over time, and remember 20 years ago when we were pioneering this, I don't think I understood that we had to almost build the ecosystem. So Acumen has evolved over the last 20 years to be a nonprofit at the top, a charitable organization that has this patient capital investing, which is about 140 million. Any money that comes back through that entity gets reinvested in innovation for the poor. As some of those companies have scaled, and the introducer was so wonderful to talk about energy, and they need now $40-50 million at a time, we have now four for-profit vehicles where we can help raise much more significant amounts of capital in traditional impact investing. Those monies will go back to the LPs that invest. Then we have a university of sorts, University Reimagined, that really is focusing on the skills, the tools of what we call moral leadership, the kind of character building that's needed to be one of these entrepreneurs. And then recently we spun off a for-profit metrics company called 60 Decibels, which is a way of really getting impact understood from the perspective of the people that we are there to serve in the first place.
Okay, thank you. So as you're talking, it's patently obvious that it's far more about money. In fact, money is just the mechanism for achieving what you want to achieve. Can you give us one or two examples of the sort of impact on the ground that Acumen have made? Perhaps one or two of the companies that you invest in, and what difference they've made to the people that they serve?
Sure. Since we started with energy, I'll go back to the D-Light example. In 2007, 1.5 billion people had no access to electricity, truly living in darkness, fully dependent on kerosene, which is expensive, dirty, dangerous. And so two young guys came into the office with a solar lantern that cost about $30, and this dream that they would eradicate kerosene, which is rather audacious given that their start was so tiny. We put about $200,000 of patient capital in at the beginning, but over time, to your point, we also supported them with 12 different year-long fellows, fairly high-level staff that could help them build their talent. We used what I would call our social capital to connect them to corporations for their supply chains, grant makers for supporting them in terms of their marketing and the design of their products. And then, as I said before, after they reached a certain level, we help them with more traditional sources of capital. Every dollar that we invest brings in another $5-6 of more traditional investment. And that company now, named D-Light, has reached over 100 million people with electricity and light. That's one example. I didn't understand when we started that you really could solve these problems if you got rid of the ideology of that it's just business or it's just government. And so a second example would be agriculture in Ethiopia, where, again, two young people who wanted to make a difference in Ethiopia, where the chicken industry was rather non-existent. The average Ethiopian ate about 0.5 kilo of chicken every year. And it's also a 10-year story, but it's a story where these guys turned the model upside down, understood again who were their customers? Farmers who makes $350 a year. How could they build a system that didn't depend on farmers raising chicks from the time they were born to the time they were 45 days old when they could possibly lay eggs themselves, or 60 days? And so created a new business model that really empowered the employees, and there are now about 1,000. Built a set of agents. There are thousands of them. Some of them make $10,000 a year. And now they serve about 20 million smallholder farmers across Ethiopia, and have been credited by government because they partner with government for reducing child malnutrition by about 11%. So I've really seen, when I'm not sure I even believed myself when we started, that you really could solve these problems. It's all within our control.
And in terms of measuring your impact, I think you've been through various sort of systems, and you've come up with something called lean data. Can you just tell us what that is?
Sure. I would say, Tony, at the very beginning, we were rather mediocre with our metrics. Like most organizations, the only thing we could count was what we could actually see, output. And then what happened in about 2011-12, when you had the proliferation of smartphones and cell phones, is that for the first time we could text the customers of our companies. Again, these are people that make $1, $2, $3 a day. But we could ask them a series of questions about a particular product, for instance, a solar home system. From their responses, we could deduce things like how many more hours a night were they staying awake? What was the quality of their lights? What were they doing when they had that extra time? Were their children doing better in school? The easy was, were we displacing carbon? We learned a lot that we liked. We also learned where our assumptions were wrong. But now we're at a point where we can look across a portfolio. And now we're the largest off-grid energy investor for the poor. And we could identify and value companies not based only on the financial metrics, although we clearly look at them, but also on the environmental metrics, on the social metrics, which companies were actually reaching very poor people, and which were profitable, but were reaching the middle class and above. And so it's been a real game changer for us.
Mm-hmm. In the book, you use a term called just start. I think you use it once or twice, perhaps. We don't always know solutions beforehand. And I guess, obviously developing acumen has been a massive challenge: organization, imagination, delivery. And it's a matter of focusing on what the right sort of impact is. And you talk in the book about now being able to understand how poor people make decisions and what they value. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? And I guess how more impactful you probably are as an organization now than you were 20 years ago?
Sure, thanks. Yeah. When I first started talking about the D-Light guys, I said they had a lot of audacity, but they also had humility. And I think we have to learn to hold those in tension. And this idea of listening to low-income people as full human beings, as customers, does nothing if not give you a lot of humility. We learned how often our assumptions were the wrong assumptions. So just a few examples. When we first started to invest in a distributed safe drinking water company, our assumption was that the women would be the purchasers, because women are the ones who traditionally have carried water. And what we saw, and we ultimately concluded, was that because this was a technology-driven enterprise with a really beautiful plant, the men were the ones that would actually buy the water. But whereas women carry the water on their heads home, that was not something the men were going to do. And so while we were so concerned with price, we saw that men would actually pay more to have the water delivered than for the water themselves. We also saw a lot around gender, that once you got the water home, we assumed impact made, game over. But what happened was that low-income people prioritized based on income they could generate. So often their chickens, their livestock would get the water first. The men and the children would get them second and third, and often the women in the family wouldn't get it at all. And so if you were building a system to try to bring water to families, or just to make money, you could do it. If you were building a system that was actually also looking at public health and maternal health, you needed to rethink a lot of things. And there's not a single company that we've had that hasn't just given me an incredible education about what it means to be human too, and how we make these choices, and how so many of the choices that we make are actually quite rational if we took the time to listen.
Just looking back over the last 20 years, the world, and therefore you and Acumen, have faced some world-changing events: 9/11, the war on terror, and of course now the pandemic. How have those things changed the way that Acumen works, operates, and actually focuses? Has it caused Acumen to refocus its efforts in particular areas as opposed to others?
Sure. My board teases me that, we were born for crisis, and that I personally was born for crisis, particularly given that my history includes building an institution just before the Rwandan genocide, and then going back to Rwanda right after, and seeing so much of what I had built decimated, but then rebuilt again. And so the first major crisis of the world in which we were born in 2001 was 9/11, as you said. We were a very small team of 4. We had already made a commitment to East Africa and to India. But I felt, particularly since we were moving into our offices at Ground Zero that day on 9/11, that we had to do something. And it seemed to us, and it seemed to me personally, that people were pulling inward just at the moment that we needed to reach outward. And call it reckless. We decided that we would start working in Pakistan and in Egypt. And then I got cold feet. And I was talking to a CEO of a big health care company, and I said, "What? I don't even know the Muslim world. I've never been to Pakistan. What am I doing?" And he said, "Look, Jacqueline, if you're the only one brave enough or stupid enough to go, and you make a commitment to stay, after 10 years, you're going to know more than anybody else." And it wasn't easy in the beginning, but I think there's great wisdom to that just start. And the universe somehow conspires. I met the most extraordinary people, and not only has Pakistan changed our institution, it's clearly changed me, and it's where we have an incredibly strong community. And then you fast forward to the pandemic, where we are celebrating our 20th, also in crisis. And to look out across the world, particularly as an American that had the PPP, or the government program to protect businesses, and realizing that between our fellows and our companies, we have 1,000 entrepreneurs, many of them working in some of the poorest parts of India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Colombia. And the level of human devastation was so extraordinary that we were a different group. We now had a very strong community, and so reached out within that first week and asked people who trusted us to give us money, not to invest in the way that they were used to us investing for 20 years, but so that we could rapidly deploy grants, also based on trust, to people that had the character to take care of their communities. And in some cases, particularly with our companies, it was concessional debt that they would pay back and have. But in many cases, it was grants. And that has fully changed us too. We will not be a grant maker. We will continue to invest in the way that we do. But it reinforced for me what it looks like when you operate and build a community of trust, and how much you can actually get done in the world. And I frankly saw a level of innovation happen as well. And it's making me think a lot about how generosity begets generosity. And it may be in my next book, actually. It's just been extraordinary to experience.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. If I may, could I just ask you a question about your personal experience? Because obviously, Acumen has been through a massive change, as we've just discussed in the last question. And obviously, that follows that you've gone through a massive personal challenge. And really, your book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, is much about Acumen as it is about your personal experience as it is about Acumen. And I guess what comes through in part is your resilience and your drive. So can I ask you what you think are the key ingredients in yourself and your background that give you that strength? And how have you developed as a person and a leader over the last 20, 30 years?
It's a big question. I'm the eldest of seven. And so I think growing up in a big, boisterous household with four brothers and two sisters, often one working bathroom, in and of itself gives you a sense of entrepreneurialism, because you have to make your way, but you make your way within the context of a tribe with a great sense of solidarity, not only from my parents, but from my siblings. And I think there's something about falling down and having the courage to get up, that it gives you more courage the next time. And I clearly am someone who has fallen down and has had to confront a pretty extraordinary crises. But each time you realize that we're so lucky. And I think right now, at this age in my life, my sense of privilege is so overwhelming that I feel almost a sense of responsibility to hold that hope, to think about what can I do. And I think that in and of itself gives a sense of resilience. A friend of mine named Adam Grant, who's a terrific writer, wrote a big article in the New Yorker on languishing and how so many people in this pandemic are languishing, neither full depression, but not able to really move, having a hard time getting out of bed. And he said, somehow I don't think you're languishing. And I said, Adam, I'm just so busy focusing on what we can do that there's no, you're right. I feel like I'm flourishing, even though I wouldn't choose to be sitting in a room, my bedroom, speaking to you in Guernsey, that beautiful place. So maybe it's about making a commitment to something bigger than yourself, and knowing that you may never achieve it in your lifetime, but it will keep you driven to try. And maybe part of what life is about is in the trying.
What comes through in the book is the challenge that effectively you've given yourself. It seems to be a constant challenge for you to push the organization forward and in a way push yourself forward. I mean, you talk about, and just to quote one or two little phrases from the book, monsters and angels being in every one of us, and you talk about navigating the grey, and also you mention one or two really threatening situations that you faced around the world, which must have been very frightening, where perhaps your life was in danger, and you got through all that.
Yeah, and there's probably too many of the traumatic things. But what I would say about monsters and angels is that was a recognition and almost an epiphany when I was sitting knee to knee with a woman I had really admired. When I worked in Rwanda, I was in my 20s. And this woman ended up being the Minister of Justice. She was our first executive director of the microfinance bank. And then she went on to help plan a genocide. And so to come back and see someone you had worked to build an institution of social justice with for 7 years, go on to create a genocide that would have some of your friends and colleagues killed, it so tore me apart that I somehow assumed that when I saw Agnes in solitary confinement in the prison in Butari, that she would look like a monster. But instead, she looked like a freckled faced young girl whose head had been shaved in a pink dress. And it was so disturbing that was really the moment where I thought, wait, I know who she was, and I do think she was someone who loved the trappings of power and fame. But she was also somebody who was trying to build a liberal party that had multiple tribes in it. And the history of who she was could have been entirely different. But right before the genocide, she turned toward power, not stayed to do, we say at Acumen, to do the right thing, not the easy thing. She went to do what she thought was, or may have thought was, the easy thing. And so that was that beginning of, wait, those monsters and angels are in all of us. And the monsters are really the broken parts, the insecurities, the petty grievances, the fear. And quite frankly, Tony, right now, when I look at where we are in the world, in my own country and in so many nations, and certainly in where we operate, and I see those same divisions and divisiveness and insecurity and fear and inequality, this is a time where it can be really easy for demagogues to prey on those broken parts. And so it feels to me that it's also a time where we have to double down and use what I would call that moral imagination to build a better world. And while the title of the book, Moral Revolution, may sound like it's full of certainty, as you probably know, it's much more full of the nuance and the recognition that we don't have the answers. We can work our way toward them if we put our humanity first. And that's, I think, the challenge for this next century.
Yeah, can I just sort of try and ask you to expand on that? And so need for a moral revolution, and you talk about the importance of dignity, which you mentioned before, equality, identity, finding one's voice. So Acumen is, and your mission is far more than just ensuring that the vibrancy of the businesses that you invest in, there's really a moral dimension to it. And can you just talk about what you mean by a moral revolution, and perhaps how what you're trying to do with the book in talking about a moral revolution?
Yeah, I think for too long we put money, power, fame at the center of our definition of success. And we have analyzed and measured not only our own worth, but the worth of our companies and our organizations based on profit and based on the power of the individual. We have a leadership model around us that believes that I can only win if you lose, that I can only be right if you're wrong. And certainly we all now know after this last year, and probably all knew coming into it, that the institutions that we trusted for so long have pretty much run their course, that we have to reimagine them, but we don't have a specific roadmap as to how. And that's the revolutionary part, that it's what's required is that we make a shift away from individualism, profit-centered, without consideration of the other, and move it toward our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth, while also insisting on financial sustainability. It's harder, and yet it is the road out. So it's a revolution, if you will, that comes not from above nor below, but from inside all of us. It's a changing consciousness in the way that we run our companies, in the way that we run our political systems, in the way that we run civil society. The good news is I feel, particularly in this past year, that more and more institutions across all three sectors are engaging in that conversation and seeing things that I just didn't think 2 years ago we would see change as quickly as we're starting to see change.
Okay, that's interesting. Can we just talk about your fellows? You talk about moral leadership, and really, I guess, what you're looking from your fellows who are the people, the entrepreneurs that you invest in and you back, you're looking for moral leadership from them. You're looking for ethics and character. Can you just talk about moral leadership and perhaps give some examples through the fellows that, perhaps one or two of the fellows that you invest in? Perhaps you could talk, illustrate it by talking about one or two of your fellows.
Sure. And again, with moral leadership as well, we're very clear that we say, we don't call our fellows leaders. We say that they're on the path of moral leadership, that all of us are so imperfect, and yet, and we don't need another hero, but we need a million heroic acts. And so our fellows are deliberately identified and selected, including from the UK, in groups of 20. UK, Spain, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Pakistan, India, East West Africa, Colombia, and we're expanding again this year. Identify 20 across race, class, ethnicity, religion. These are young people who, in many cases, have been raised to hate each other, and yet have entrepreneurial ambitions to help solve problems in their country. So one example that also brings in the example of the pandemic, this moment of pandemic, is Sarah Khurram Saeed, who's a Pakistani fellow who started a company called Sehat Kahani a number of years ago, because as a woman doctor, she recognized that most of her colleagues stopped practicing once they married, 30% of all women doctors, and that this was a underutilized and yet deeply valuable resource in the nation. And so Sehat Kahani had at the center an app for telemedicine, but rural women didn't want to pay just to have a one-on-one consultation on an app. And so the company ultimately built 26 health clinics. First day of lockdown, health clinics were deemed as non-essential if they were private. And so she just decided, North Star, I am here to get people healthcare. We are in a health crisis. And so even though she wasn't very capitalized, she made the app free. She put a call out to doctors across the nation and said, we need you to volunteer. And by now, she's had about 350,000 consultations on this app, 5,000 doctors, not just in Pakistan, but in the diaspora, that are now working with women across the country. And government has partnered with her, and I dare say this is going to be part of the nation's healthcare system. And then in India, another moral imagination and crisis story, a woman named Suhani Mohan created a distributed manufacturing company to manufacture and sell sanitary napkins, women's menstrual health products, because there was such a menstrual health crisis across poor areas of India. And she was particularly interested in the Naxal, the conflict areas that are also quite mountainous. And she realized that the only way she could get these health products to low-income women was to create mini factories, and that there was such low trust in those areas that she would allow the different communities to brand the products whatever they wanted to. No venture capitalist would invest in a consumer goods product that didn't have a single brand. But that's where we could come in, our community could come in and get her the kind of capital that she needed, so that now she has 40 factories up and running, and she sold 6 or 8 million napkins. That was also deemed inessential in the beginning of the crisis in India. And so in that same entrepreneurial spirit, not to stop, because she also had all these jobs, she went to Mahindra, a big auto manufacturer, and convinced Anant Mahindra to give her an empty factory where they could retool her machines and make masks and keep the women, particularly in Mumbai, employed until they got permission for the government then to open up the factories and continue selling the menstrual products. So it's a group of entrepreneurial, moral, I believe, role models that are spending their lives using business, but using it as a tool of peace, using it as a tool of solving some of our biggest problems, and they become quite a community to one another during this moment in India where there's just such suffering. We have about 140 fellows across the nation just showing up for each other in ways that are really teaching me a lot.
When you set up Acumen, it was set up as a highly ethical organization. Obviously, you're operating in a world which is, let's say, a bit cynical. So you're confronting every day moral dilemmas and wanting to hold on to your ethical standards. How do you negotiate that? What are the challenges in that?
Yeah, and it's an interesting conversation to have right now when we're in a moment where there is a lot of righteousness and a desire for purity often. And again, it's the irony of using the word moral, because what I've come to talk about, although I always knew it, is that if you're an activist, there is that space for the pure, the righteous, that this is wrong. If you're a builder, you have to live in the gray. You have to hold to your integrity and keep that sense of wholeness while also confronting a level of ugly I never imagined in my life we would have to confront. No one told me when we were starting out that if you're working in healthcare, education, housing, energy, you're working in some of the most corrupt industries on the planet. And so a benefit of patient capital is that we can enable our entrepreneurs not to pay bribes, to hold them through it. A benefit of building a strong community is that we can use other methods of persuasion to do the right thing. We've taken haircuts on our investments, sometimes massive ones, when we've seen that business as usual from one of our entrepreneurs, meaning two sets of books or paying speed money or extortion or sabotage, things I didn't want to learn about. It's not acceptable, because at the end of the day, we want this group of entrepreneurs to be known as people who, again, aren't perfect, but are doing the right thing wherever they can, not the easy thing. And they often pay a price for it, as I and Acumen have paid a price for it. But until we stand up and do these kinds of things, not from a place of righteousness, and we're not perfect, but until we have the willingness to do that, it's too easy then to say, why should I trust anybody? And I think it may be the most important thing we've done at some level is this idea of ethos. We've still moved $1 billion. We've still impacted 300 million people. Our companies employ tens of thousands of people. So the competence is there, but so is a commitment to trying to walk a path of integrity, knowing that it comes with a cost.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you about your support for women? When you were in Rwanda, and you talk about it in your first book, The Blue Sweater, I think your work was very much involved with supporting women in starting up new enterprises. And how have you carried that through into Acumen? And do you think the loss of women in the areas that you work in the developing countries has improved over the last 20 years or not?
When I first started Acumen, to be perfectly honest, I didn't put women at the center. I always understood that when you were talking about poverty, you were talking about women and children. But I felt that one of the shortcomings of microfinance, which is what I had been doing prior, was that it gave women $50, $30 loans. And that what we also needed to do was build systems that got people healthcare and housing, and that was going to take $1 million investments. And so I was maniacal on looking for what I would call the winners. Can we build a company in Tanzania that's selling bed nets and grow it? And so this particular company ended up hiring 10,000 women, making 30 million malaria bed nets a year, but it was run by men. And the dream, and people would criticize me at the beginning, saying, "You were such a women's advocate, and 70% of your portfolio is men." And again, that goes to that integrity and that compromise. Part of building the fellows program was to start to create that pipeline of women. And what's exciting to me now is that 4 of our country directors are women, of 6. That 50% of our fellows in all of the nations in which we're operating are women, and that in the United States, 50% of our entrepreneurs are women, and a growing number of our entrepreneurs are women. But across the board, the customers of these companies are female, and increasingly people are finding that women are better employers. So Delight has about 7,000 employees. 40% of the agents are female, and watching them change their lives and change their nation's life has been incredible. So I didn't start off deliberately saying this is about women, but I always have been, I've always been very committed to women, and now we use a gender lens in everything in which we invest. The world has changed with us, and maybe we've been part of pushing the change.
You mentioned, I quite like, can you just talk about the concept of accompaniment, a Jesuit idea meaning to live and walk alongside those you serve. And you talk about that in relation to SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, which I think is in India. I quite like that idea. Can you just talk about that a bit?
Yeah, the Jesuits, as you said, it's to walk beside. It's I'll hold a mirror to you and help you see yourself, maybe things that you don't see in yourself. And what I love about accompaniment is that it's essentially about owning a problem with someone, but not solving the problem for them, helping them build their own muscles. And we've actually even brought this into acumen, so that when we first started, we looked much more like traditional private equity with a post-investment unit. And now we accompany our entrepreneurs. We know that we are with them for 10 years and that it's shared ownership, if you will, their success. We focus on, can we invest more than we extract? The Sewa model was so powerful for me because it included meeting a woman named Dampati who had been thrown out of her the slum in which she was dwelling for 15 years with her family of 10. They lived in a tent for 7 years in a resettlement area where they didn't have the right documentation to get a piece of land. So they had to work, speaking of the corruption, work the system, built a house with no land ownership. And what Sewa does is give you a mortgage anyway, based on your character. And when I went to go see Dampati, having been used so often to meet with women who the system has told are worthless, are not smart, are not deserving, one of the first things she said to me is, "My name is Dampati." I said, "Well, you're proud." And she said, "Well, Sewa is the first place that anybody has ever actually used my name. That in my community, the minute you get married, your mother, your wife, your daughter-in-law, you're ugly, but no one calls you by your name. But at Sewa, they call me by my name. My name is Dampati." And I was so moved by that. And then the idea that this was a group that would show up, that would ensure that she was making her loan payments, and when she couldn't, would get other women in the community to help her, but didn't absolve her of her responsibilities and her obligations. And when you look at Sewa is now almost 1 million women strong as a labor union of self-employed women, but this was a particular housing company that has really changed the face of how we might think about lending to people who are homeless and without title. And these are the kinds of innovations that I I'm most moved by, and feel that we've all got to double down on building.
Looking at the title of your book, you use the word manifesto, and it's a rallying cry, really, isn't it? And I'd like to sort of address this question perhaps to us. Guernsey's quite a wealthy community, quite sophisticated. We have links around the world. Two elements, really. How can we as individuals or as a community assist in the sort of work that you do? And then as an island, how should we act in the world?
Oh, such great questions. As a community, some people in Guernsey, including the Stars, are acumen partners and are part of our community already, providing grants that we then turn around and invest either in the companies or in building leadership. And the Stars also are supporting Acumen Academy UK and the fellowship there. I do believe this is a moment where if we had one golden rule, it's not do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but give more to the world than you take. And for those of us who do have so much privilege, again, so many of the conversations can be so strident that it's making people of privilege hide it rather than use it. And if ever there's been a moment in our lifetime to use it, it's now. And it goes back in some ways to just start. What are the assets that you have? For many of us, they're financial. And where are these organizations that could use help, not in a way that too often philanthropy is done. I'll give a little bit of money and see what happens for a program, but rather give unrestricted to organizations who are led by people of real character. Let them dream. Watch those dreams move. Give for multiple years, not just 1 year, so that you can build an organization like entrepreneurs are expected to build for-profit companies. We need to have more of that ethos in the philanthropy that we do. But as I said, there's mentoring, there's showing up, there's integrating how we treat our employees and our other stakeholders into the companies and many of the companies that we're building and frankly working with. Corporations are starting to do more and more of that. And this idea of being an island, which is so fascinating when you think of John Donne, no man is an island. We need each other. And one of the things that we don't talk enough about with philanthropy is it brings you into worlds that you might not ever know otherwise. And it's so enriching of life for me personally to immerse with the Dalit community, the formerly untouchable community, the Dalit community in India or in the Thar Desert of Pakistan. And you don't have to personally go there, but there are places right nearby to know. And with the technologies that we have now, I do think you asked this early on, it's not about the dignity we give others. It's not about the change we make in others, but it's the dignity that we get ourselves and the way we change as human beings. Maybe we should talk about that more when we think about philanthropy and think about change.
Okay, thanks, Jacqueline. That's great. I'm going to open up to the floor now. A few questions from the audience, if that's okay with you. And also there's people listening remotely, so if they've got questions as well, please send them in. So, any questions? Nigel.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for such an inspirational talk this evening. We've got a small project in South Africa where we assist the township community with a lot of social benefits and helps, food programs, job schemes. We help them with drug rehabilitation. We've built an orphanage. And one of the things that comes back to me time and time again on my visits to South Africa is the opposition of the government. Now, I don't know if you've had any experience in the countries where you've been assisting with the apparent lethargy of central government, and any advice you can give me on that one. Thank you.
Hard, yes. What I've learned from making mistakes is the importance of having people on the ground. And frankly, now it's not just people on the ground, but people in the place where government operates. So sometimes your office might be more rural or in a secondary city, but actually now our offices are big enough that we always have somebody in a capital city where they can build relationship with government, because it's just so important. And it's where I really think about the power of community and who is in our community. And I think I used to think, Gandhi says first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I used to think, well, you go under the radar and you build something, and then when it gets really big, you partner and all is well. What I didn't understand is when you get visible, often there's sabotage and, as you said, a level of bureaucracy, complacency, corruption that just holds you back. And the best antidote that I have found is relationship, community building, telling the truth, and sometimes using the international media to bring attention to things that should be talked about locally.
Thank you. Another question? No? Oh, yes, over there.
Hi, Jacqueline. My name's Louise. I'm a director of a Guernsey-based charity, and we run village savings and loans groups in Uganda and the DRC. And you obviously have such a lifetime of experience of working with the poor and working in Africa. And I was wondering if you were looking back at yourself, if you would give yourself any more advice about what you would have done differently in the beginning. And from your books, I've taken the point that you would listen to the people that you work with rather than assume what they actually want. But I was wondering if you would have any other advice that you would have given yourself when you first started out.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the work you're doing. It's exciting to hear about South Africa, DRC, and Uganda in just two people. Certainly listen with more humility than I did when I first showed up to save the world. But I think the real advice I would give to my younger self was speak up even more. Don't be afraid. That there was there were times when I would think, I know what we have to do, but I didn't always push into it in the way that I think I might have. It took a lot longer than I would have liked to gain the kind of courage that I wanted and that I needed. Partner. Advice that was given to me that I was really lucky to get was don't take the credit. And so even in starting Duterembre, the microfinance organization, the one thing we did really right was have co-founders who were Rwandan. And I did a lot of the work at the beginning, but we had such a great relationship that at one point they said to me, "You're going too fast. We can't keep up." And we made a deal where I would leave the country every couple of months and come back. And it didn't necessarily go the way I wanted it to go. And yet I saw over time that an institution was being built, and that now, even though it went through a genocide, and when I go back no one knows who I was. I mean, some people do, but there's an institution, and it's a Rwandan institution. And so I guess that was advice I was given, and I'm glad I took. But I think for me, just who I was as a young woman, who on one hand was incredibly fierce, and on the other hand, wondered if I had earned my place yet. I think I might have taken a little bit more space. And I would go faster. Your boards, your donors, everybody else tells you to slow down, slow down, slow down. I just turned 60, and now I would say to my younger self, go faster. Life is short.
Another question.
Jacqueline, my name's Rupert Dorey. Could you describe the emergence over the last few years of significant investment coming in via social impact funds has been a big feature. Can you sort of compare and contrast and what effects the impact of social impact funds has had in this arena that you're in, whether it's on energy, microfinance, health, education, agriculture, and how you work or the work that you do corresponds with the work these social impact funds does. Now, crucially, for those that don't know, social impact funds essentially are vehicles which seek to make a return, but the returns that they make go way beyond financial returns, but also impacts on people on the ground in their real lives. Thank you.
It's a great question. I think net, it's all been really positive. And as I said, we have 4 impact funds under the umbrella of Acumen now, and are focused even more, therefore, on raising the philanthropy for the patient capital early stage. Because what's happened is that as the impact sector has grown, it's become a bit chaotic. So on one side, you've got ESG, the environmental, social, and governmental screens, if you will, that are holding companies to account. Some are accused of just using them for greenwashing, and they're not taking ESG very seriously. Some are. And so I think we're going to start to see fallout there, but it's a good narrative. It's a good movement. And then you see the impact investors that are much more focused, not just on screening for impact, but ensuring some level of impact. Most of those also are looking for commercial viability before they invest, as are our for-profit funds. And then you've got the higher risk patient capital funds for very low income people that are trying to get the capital back, but not return to the donor. And what I'm hoping is that over the next 10 years, we will see a more stratified sector where we start to really think about the right kind of capital that we then can connect to the right character, the right entrepreneur for change. We have a while to go there, but I think it is all good news that there is an impact sector. And if I may, my long-term dream is that we get to a point where we don't have to modify impact investing, and that all investing, as is all business, becomes expected to serve society and not simply a small group of shareholders.
First Bella and then Justin.
Hi, Jacqueline. I also have 4 brothers and I have 4 sisters. And I get,
Oh.
yeah, I get.
And what number are you?
Second eldest. Yeah. So we
definitely relate.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And, you know, it's easy to be called bossy or anything else because it's in your DNA. You're a carer and you're bossy and you're a housekeeper and a nanny from an early age. I get it. It does make you quite used to a variety of people and pushing your, you know, what you care about forward. And it's a great, as you say, it builds resilience. And I'm very fortunate to have been part of such a large family. It's, I get it. My question to you is, on Guernsey, we're an island of haves and have-nots. and we have a very low income tax. We pay 20% tax, so we have to somehow meet the need of the people who don't have, and the government can't, of course, pay for it because we only pay 20% tax. So it falls on the high net worth here to really fund what we do in the third sector. And it's not an obligation. So those of us who lead charities are scroungers and beggars, and it's exhausting. And what do you think we could do to make it an obligation for people who choose to come here, who are of high net worth, to contribute as essential that they contribute, an obligation, rather than leave it to their goodwill? Do you think we should have some sort of formal arrangement whereby if you come and live here, you are obligated to contribute to the community rather than leave it to their own moral fibre?
I don't think I'm the right person to talk about the should there, but what I do think is that, we're starting to see with greater transparency a growing expectation that the decisions that we made will be known by other people. And I do think that that is starting to change the zeitgeist and make the shift. We so often talk about community and what we get from community, but the strongest communities are also connected to what we contribute, what we give to community. I do think that the relationship between nonprofits and philanthropists is often very broken. And the word that you used of scrounging is a word that is it's painful to hear, and it's all too true. That if we want to build robust civil society institutions, we need to ensure that they have the kind of capital to do the work that's needed to be done, and to hold those organizations to account as well. And that requires a level of honesty in the way that we have conversations with one another. I was really lucky at Acumen in that I brought a private sector mindset when I first started it, so it didn't dawn on me to give people the choice of where they were going to put their money. I just said, here's the deal, come and be part of it. We're going to change philanthropy, and we're going to revolutionize the way that we solve problems. And it gave me a freedom. It gave me equity, if you will, to hire the right talent, build the right team, create the right partnerships to actually make change. And sometimes I will meet with people now, and they want you to pay people nothing, not have an office, very little overhead on any level, and yet make miracles happen. And when you see this pandemic that is so exposed our most vulnerable, there's no conclusion but that equation has to change, and that we need a more honest conversation about what it actually takes to make change. I think that there's a real willingness, a growing willingness of philanthropists to give. And maybe it's also part to us to have that open conversation about what that looks like.
One last question from Justin.
Hi, Jacqueline. Justin Sykes here. Some of the people in the room might have some long memories and remember that you came to our wonderful island 5 years ago. So it's amazing to see you again. Amazing to see you again, but just a shame we can't see you in person. A question I have to you is, Acumen's had so much impact over the years and really shown a game-changing way in which poverty can be solved through the power of markets. And the conversation around off-grid energy is such a powerful one. I'm wondering, there are still some very wicked problems in the world. I'm wondering, do you see development challenges that have really the world still struggling with, that are still unaddressed and underserved? And where do you see the frontier of venture philanthropy and impact investing? Where should money be going these days that are perhaps addressing problems that still remain underserved?
Thanks, Justin. It's great to see you again. And thanks for all the work you do as well. I mean, right now we need money going pretty much everywhere when you see how broken, um, particularly the developing world is. But as the woman said, right in Guernsey, you've got issues of the have-nots. Where I see the frontier is even more radical uses of capitalism, actually. And it's so fascinating to me, Justin, because when I talk to young people, it's almost a bifurcated conversation. Either we hate capitalism or we love capitalism. And I just spoke to a business school like that, and it was 50-50. Those who think we should go socialism and those who think that we should just keep to business as usual and a shareholder primacy model. And so I talked to them about how I've worked in socialist economies, I've worked in capitalist economies, and I can tear them both apart and show you what works and what doesn't work. It's all a choice. What's exciting now is this new crop of entrepreneurs that are starting again with the problem that we're solving. So this is a US-based company, but I could totally see it operating in the UK or anywhere. It's a guy that started a fast, nutritious, affordable, healthy restaurant for low-income people in Los Angeles, in a low-income community in Los Angeles. It was so valued by the community that it grew to 8 restaurants. And on the first day of lockdown, like Sarah in Pakistan, Sam doubled down on his commitment to his community and said, put out on social media, if you need us to deliver food, we'll deliver it to you, which is what most restaurants do. But he also said, if you're willing to pay it forward and help a family eat that can't afford, here's a link to give charity. And if you can't afford to pay at all, let us know, we'll deliver it free. Thousands of people came forward with philanthropy to enable this restaurant system to get food to low-income people. And then that came to the attention of government, which then partnered. And by now they've brought about 6 million meals to people across Los Angeles who needed food. The whole business model is different. Now you've got a charitable component, you've got a government component, you've got the private sector. And Sam has done more because he realizes that if you really want to integrate people into the economy, they need not just income, but wealth. And so he's also raising a $13 million, essentially 10-year debt facility where the investors and philanthropists both will get 1% back on their money. That then is on lent to the employees who are being trained by the company to start franchises. And he assumes he will have 40 franchises over the next 3 years run by formerly, hopefully, low-income people from the neighborhood that didn't really have any specific skill set when they started working at a fast food restaurant, but built them over time by being accompanied by this company that allowed them to build their capabilities, got them the right kind of capital, and a support structure that helped them really become contributors to the economy. I could give you 10 examples like that have come through just our portfolio over the last 6 months of the pandemic. And that is where I think the frontier is, that we maybe have been too gentle on the economy, using the instruments that we might tweak a little bit. And now it's recognizing that we've got really powerful tools in this toolkit of capitalism, but we have to control them. We have to think about what they actually need to be, how they need to be structured so that the poor, the vulnerable, those who have been excluded, overlooked, can be integrated and allowed to contribute.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for that. Thank you for your questions. We've come to the end of our time. It's been a fantastic hour. Thank you thank you so much, Jacqueline, for joining us. The Wonders of Technology. We've got your book at the back, which I'm sure will sell out. It's a fantastic read. It's an inspiring read. Thank you very much, and perhaps one day we'll see you here again.
I look forward to it. It's such a beautiful, magical place. And thank you so much. Thanks for the questions, and thanks to everyone for showing up.
Thank you very much. So bye for now.
Bye. Take care.
And you too. Thanks, everybody. There are other events this week. Please look up on GuernseyLiteraryFestival.com for booking details. Thank you.